чичери, 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 розчешимя кучері, 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 розчешимя кучері, кучері, кучері. Я би тобі чесала, 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 якби мати не знала, не знала, не знала, якби мати не знала, не знала, не знала.
Hello. The Cold War was a period of time where a pair of friends turned enemies kept comparing their economic systems, and they wanted to use their power to influence as many countries to join their side as they could. This continued in proxy wars and other
Alright, what's one then? Alright, give me some cover!
friendly competitions. How long did this go on for? The year is 1949, 4 years after the War to End All Wars, the sequel, had ended. Now people are coming back to people and having fun with people and making more people. The United States and the United Kingdom have a new baby, and the Soviet Union also has a new baby. The NBA was founded, and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was recorded, which was recorded in June. But our story begins with the founding of NATO, or the National Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the Capitalist Club. NATO was basically a group that did capitalist things. A few months later, a man named Mao Zedong wins control over China and created the People's Republic of China, or Communist China. Tensions start to rise between the United States and the Soviet Union when they realize that the United States doesn't like communists and the Soviet Union doesn't like the capitalists. The United States is capitalist and the Soviet Union is communist. And they got a lot of buddies, but they both know that if they try to fight each other, everyone will die. Luckily, they can fight in other ways, like the Korean War. The Korean War started because the guys up there didn't like the guys down there. The Korean War was between North and South Korea. The North was supported by the Soviet Union and China, and the South was supported by the United States and some of our buddies. On July 26, 1953, a guy named Fidel Castro and his buddies started a revolution against a guy named Fulgencio Batista, who just did a coup a few years before in Cuba. Castro wanted to run things like the Soviet Union did, with communism. This becomes important. We'll come back to check up on them. Over in Korea, July 27, 1953, the day after the Cuban Revolution started, the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed that created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, which does what President Truman wanted to do in terms of containing communism. To this day, North and South Korea are still technically at war in a frozen conflict, peering over the 38th parallel, waiting for something to happen. In the 50s, people get more paranoid about this communism thing. One of these people was Senator Joseph McCarthy. Wikipedia defines McCarthyism as the practice of making accusations of subversion and treason, especially when related to anarchism, communism, and socialism, and especially when done in a public and attention-grabbing manner. And some people, hey Siri, who wrote The Crucible? Arthur Miller. Where was I? And some people, Arthur Miller is some people, compare it to the Salem witch trials. On May 14th, 1955, the Soviet Union and its communist friends looked at NATO, or the Capitalist Club, and said, I want to do that. So they did, and they made the Warsaw Pact, or the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. The Commie Clan. Now we actually have two teams in the Cold War, the Capitalist Club and the Commie Clan. Over in Vietnam, a little bit south of Korea, communist Vietnamese nationalists like Ho Chi Minh tried to take over Vietnam. France couldn't handle it anymore, so on November 1st, 1955, the Soviet Union and the United States did what they did in Korea and split Vietnam in two, the North and the South. The United Nations splits Vietnam at the 17th parallel, the North being led by Ho Chi Minh, and the South being led by Kingdom. Was it really that hard? Then the North invades the South, and the Vietnam War starts. At first, we think that the Vietnam War is going to be just like the Korean War, where we can contain communism, keep it up north, and it'll all be good. On October 14, 1957, the Soviet Union figures out how to take a basketball painted silver with 4 yardsticks taped to the side to fly around the world a couple times without falling down. This freaks the United States out. The United States gets jelly and the space race starts. Yet another competition. This is also the plot of 007 Moonraker, which is one of the best, worst movies I've ever seen. In 1959, back in Cuba, Fidel Castro and his buddies win the Cuban Revolution and Castro jumps into power. In 1960, the Soviet Union finds a plane that didn't look like theirs flying around in their airspace. So they shoot it down. Turns out it's a U-2
With or without you.
spy plane. This really raised tensions during the Cold War, with the Soviet Union now knowing that the United States had spies over them. On October 16th until the 29th in 1962, the United States, with a U-2 plane over Cuba, because we never learned, discovers Soviet Union nuclear missiles in Cuba pointed at the United States. These were apparently some of the scariest days in the Cold War. I don't know, I wasn't there. Because if they launched those missiles, they could nuke a long list of American cities. Luckily, the United States and the Soviet Union make a deal that if the Soviet Union takes their missiles out of Cuba, the United States will take their missiles out of Turkey. This next event will blow your mind. November 22nd, 1963. Kennedy was shot.
Chief Executive.
I was going to tell a joke about JFK, but it went straight through my head. August 7th, 1964. The Vietnam War is still going. This whole idea of containing communism in Vietnam is not going well. The terrain, guerrilla warfare, Viet Cong, and all the hate from anti-Vietnam protesters back in the States are not making it much easier. Lyndon B. Johnson created the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which allowed him to, quote, take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression, which basically meant he could do war stuff without getting any consent from Congress. Eventually, both teams, the Capitalist Club and the Commie Clan, are getting kind of tired of this game. So, they plan to get things to stop with a couple discussions called the The Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. The Strategic Arms Limitation Talk. The first one, in November of 1969, leads to the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, but it also leads to an interim agreement between the two countries, the United States and the Soviet Union. On April 30th, 1975, the North Vietnam takes over the whole of Vietnam. The city of Saigon falls, the United States pull out their troops, and that marks the end of the Vietnam War. Another one of those SALT talks happens in June of 1979 between the United States and the Soviet Union, aimed at limiting the production of strategic nuclear weapons. But it was never really done because of the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan and the discovery of a Soviet combat brigade located in Cuba. In 1991, the Warsaw Pact, the Commie Clan, make like One Direction and split up. Then, the Soviet Union makes like This Girl's Lungs at a One Direction concert and collapses. Thanks for watching!